The rifle bolt slid home behind him with a sound Jax Harlan had heard in 3 countries. He was kneeling on breaking permafrost above Cook Inlet. A welded metal container sat in the fractured earth at his feet. The coastline was cracking beneath his boots. Jax was a combat veteran. His wife took everything. The town of Ninilchik, Alaska, had not spoken a word to him in 7 weeks. Smoky, his retired military dog, stood reading the armed man through the spruce. In 4 hours, the ice would break and take 52 years of buried truth down to the bottom of the inlet. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. The cabin had belonged to a dead man named Elias Yakov, and Jax Harlan had broken the lock on the back door 6 weeks ago with a tire iron wrapped in a sock to keep the sound from carrying across the frozen inlet. It was the kind of breaking and entering a soldier learned not to advertise. Quiet, deliberate, no damage to the frame, just a pick and a twist, and the soft mechanical surrender of cheap Alaskan hardware that had not been replaced since the Nixon administration. Jax had stood inside the dark kitchen for a full minute after the door swung open, listening for dogs, listening for voices, listening for the sound of a life that was no longer there. Elias Yakov had died in July, no wife, no children, no heirs on any document Jax had been able to find in the small public records office in Ninilchik. The cabin was going to be auctioned by the county in the spring, after the ground thawed enough for surveyors to stake it. Until then, it was empty. And empty was a thing Jax Harlan had come to understand as opportunity. He replaced the broken latch with a finishing nail and a strip of rawhide he had cut from a belt. It would hold until April. After April, he would be someone else's problem, or he would be gone, or he would be dead, and in his current accounting of things, those 3 possibilities were roughly equivalent. The cabin had no electricity. The power company had disconnected the service in August. There was a wood stove in the front room, a cast-iron Ashley from the 1970s that Elias Yakov had clearly fed faithfully for decades, because the chimney was clean and the firebox had been brushed out. Jax fed it with driftwood he pulled from the beach, and with fallen spruce he dragged in from the tree line, and he split everything with a dull axe he had found in the shed. The axe was the kind of tool a man kept for 50 years and never sharpened. And Jax sharpened it on the 3rd day with a whetstone he carried in his pack, because a dull axe was how soldiers lost fingers in places where fingers mattered more than medals. Smoky slept on an old wool army blanket 6 feet from the stove. She did not sleep on the bed. She had never in the 9 years Jax had known her slept on a bed. She slept where she could see both the door and the window, and she slept in the particular way German Shepherds sleep when they are still on duty, which is to say she was never fully unconscious. And the faintest change in the cabin's sound pattern brought her head up with her ears forward and her amber eyes already tracking. The cabin had one window that faced the inlet. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, in the middle of October in Ninilchik, the sun dropped behind the Aleutian Range across the water, and the light went. Not dimmed, went. The cabin filled with a blue-black cold that the wood stove could push back by 3 feet and no farther. Jax sat in a wooden chair in that 3-foot radius and watched the window and did not think about certain things. He thought about other things instead. He thought about the smell of the chimney draw. He thought about the weight of his combat boots on the plank floor. He thought about the way Smoky's breathing slowed when she was genuinely asleep and deepened when she was listening. He did not think about Rachel. He did not think about the psychiatric ward in Tacoma, where he had spent 73 days after his second discharge, and he did not think about the papers a notary had brought to him there. Papers that Rachel's lawyer had already signed. Papers that transferred the title of the house in Spokane to her name alone, because Jax had been deemed, for a specific legal window of 14 months, not competent to sign or refuse to sign anything. He did not think about the VA casework officer who had told him, in the voice of a woman reading a cafeteria menu, that the transfer had technically been legal, because the paperwork had been filed within the window, and that his options were to file a civil suit he could not afford, or to let it go. He did not think about letting it go. He did not think about the kitchen with the yellow curtains. He did not think about his father's toolbox he had left in the garage, The toolbox with the dog tags welded to the inside lid, Vietnam dog tags, and he did not think about the day 3 months later when he drove to Spokane and found the house sold and the new owner's children riding bicycles in the driveway and the toolbox gone. He did not think about any of that. He kept those things folded inside a gallon Ziploc bag at the bottom of his canvas pack. The bag held his DD-214, his Purple Heart citation, the psychiatric discharge summary, a photograph of Smoky taken at the base veterinary clinic the day she was cleared for retirement, and his wife's wedding ring. Rachel had mailed the ring to the VA in Tacoma 4 months after the divorce was final. She had wrapped it in a grocery store receipt. The receipt was for diapers and formula and a rotisserie chicken and a bottle of white wine. And the date on the receipt was a Tuesday, and the signature line at the bottom was her signature, and there was no note inside the envelope. Just the ring and the receipt and her name in her own handwriting on a thing she had paid for with the credit card that used to also be his. She had a child now. He did not know its name. He had not asked. The ring sat in the Ziploc bag, and he did not take it out. He did not throw it away either. A soldier learned that certain objects were evidence, not keepsakes, and evidence was kept because the case was not closed, even when the case was only against yourself. Around his neck, under his thermal shirt, he wore his father's dog tags, Vietnam, 1968. The tags had gone into the Mekong Delta on a 19-year-old kid from Lewiston, Idaho, who came home quiet and never spoke of it, who worked as a machinist for 41 years and died of pancreatic cancer in a VA hospital in Boise on a Thursday afternoon with his son holding his hand. Jax had taken the tags from his father's neck in that hospital room. The nurse had looked the other way. The tags had been warm from the old man's skin, and they had never been cold since because Jax had worn them every day for the 11 years that followed. He fed the wood stove. He watched the window. At 6 o'clock the aurora began. It started the way it always started, as a faint pale smudge low on the northern horizon, the kind of smudge a man could pretend was a cloud or a distant town light or the reflection of ice on the inlet. But it did not stay a smudge. It built, it climbed. It rolled upward through the black sky in slow green curtains that shifted and pulsed and folded back on themselves, and within 20 minutes the entire northern half of the heavens was moving, alive, breathing, a color that was not quite green and not quite white, and not quite the color of anything a man had seen on the earth itself. The aurora borealis. Beautiful, the tourists said, magical, spiritual. The glossy brochures in the Anchorage airport called it the light of the gods, and the Inuit had a dozen names for it, and the scientists explained it in terms of solar wind and magnetosphere, and all of it was true, and all of it was real, and none of it mattered to the chemistry inside Jax Harlan's skull. His brain did not see the aurora. His brain saw flares. Phosphorus flares fired from a mortar tube 2 clicks north of a dirt road outside Kandahar, flares that hung in the sky for 45 seconds at a time and lit a hillside in that exact pale green-white shifting light, flares that meant a sniper was trying to spot your position, flares that meant the next sound you would hear would be the whistle of the incoming round. His pulse rose, his hands resting on his knees went damp with sweat inside the cabin where the ambient temperature was 41 degrees. The back of his neck prickled in the specific pattern that meant his body was dumping cortisol into his bloodstream against his will. He breathed through his nose, 4 in, 6 out, the breathing pattern the VA therapist had taught him. The breathing pattern that did not stop the response but slowed it enough that he did not black out. Smoky rose from the wool blanket. She did not rush. She never rushed. She crossed the 3 feet of cabin floor with the controlled economy of a dog who had done this exact thing several thousand times, and she sat down beside his chair, and she pressed her shoulder against the outside of his right thigh with a weight that was deliberate and constant and communicated one thing and one thing only. I'm here. I'm here, and I am watching the door. Jax's right hand moved to the top of her skull, and his fingers settled between her ears in the hollow where the thick fur parted, and he held them there, and he did not grip, and he did not pet. He just held. His thumb pressed lightly against the ridge of bone behind her left ear, a contact point he had learned in her first year of deployment. The contact point that told her he was still present, still tracking, still on the mission. She leaned harder into his thigh. The aurora rolled overhead. He did not move from the chair for 2 hours and 11 minutes. At 8:12, the light faded. Jax knew the time without looking because he had counted. A soldier counted. A soldier counted because counting was the one thing a man could do when the rest of the world had decided that his nervous system was a thing that ran on a schedule he did not set. When the aurora was gone and the sky was only black again and the stars had returned to being stars, Jax Harlan stood up from the chair and fed the wood stove and walked to the window and put his forehead against the cold glass and breathed until the glass fogged and then unfogged and then fogged again. Smoky watched him from the blanket. The cabin held. The town of Ninilchik, 3/4 of a mile inland along the frozen road, did not know he was here. That was not entirely true. The town knew. The town had seen him unloading cases of pink salmon at the northern coast processing shed for 6 weeks, knee-deep in fish guts and ice slurry, wearing the same orange waterproof coveralls the rest of the seasonal crew wore. The town had seen his truck parked behind the cannery. The town had seen him buying beans and flour and kerosene at the general store on Sterling Highway. The town had not spoken to him. There was a rule in Ninilchik, a rule that was not written down anywhere because Ninilchik did not write down its rules. The rule was that an outsider had to be present for 1 full season, 4 months at minimum, before anyone in the community would engage him in anything beyond a cash transaction. The rule was older than the town's incorporation. The rule had been carried down from the Danaina villages that predated the Russian trappers and the white fishermen and the oilmen and everyone else who had come to the Kenai Peninsula over the last 200 years. The rule existed because the Kenai was a place where men came to disappear, and the community had learned, slowly and at a cost, that the men who came to disappear usually disappeared harder when they were drawn out early. Jax had been in Ninilchik for 7 weeks. He was 3 weeks short of the threshold. He was invisible. The cannery work had ended 8 days ago. The last run of late pinks had been processed and boxed and loaded onto the Aleutian freight barge, and the foreman, a tired man named Denis Pavlov, had counted out Jax's final envelope of cash on the plywood desk in the office and said, "Thanks for the season," and that had been the end of the conversation. The envelope had contained $486. Jax had spent $112 on food and kerosene in the 4 days since. He had $374 left in a paper envelope in the bottom of his pack, and the temperature outside was dropping 2 degrees a night, and the first real freeze was coming inside a week. He had a plan. The plan was to stay in the cabin until the ground was too frozen to auction, which would be mid-November, and then to drive his truck south through Homer and across the state to the Alcan Highway, and then to drive the Alcan to Washington, and then to turn east and to keep turning east until he ran out of road. The plan was not a good plan. The plan had approximately 72 hours of margin before it collapsed into a worse plan. But the plan was a plan, and a soldier with a plan was not a soldier without one. Smoky breathed slowly on the blanket. The wood stove ticked. The ring in the Ziploc bag did not move. The cabin held. Outside, in the dark, the inlet was breathing. The tide was going out. The ice along the shore, thin new ice that had formed only in the last 4 nights, was cracking in the slow, rhythmic way that new ice cracks when the water beneath it moves. The sound traveled through the frozen ground and came up through the cabin's floor joists and into the soles of Jax Harlan's boots, and he felt it more than he heard it, and his soldier's brain logged it without his conscious mind noticing. Something under the ice was shifting. Something that had been still for a long time. He did not know it yet. He sat by the stove. Smoky watched him. The night held. Smoky was at the door at 6:14 in the morning, and she was not asking to be let out. She was waiting to be let out. There was a difference, and Jax Harlan, lying in the dark of the back room on a sleeping pad over wooden planks, knew the difference, the way a man knows the difference between a wife calling his name and a wife calling his full name. He heard the shift of her weight on the plank floor. He heard her sit, once, at the door. He heard her stand again after 30 seconds. He heard her claws click, soft and precise, as she adjusted her stance to face the grain of the door, not the knob. She was not restless. She was cued. Jax sat up in the dark. The cabin was cold. The stove had burned down to coals in the night, and the air inside held the specific knife-edge temperature of an Alaskan interior at dawn in late October, 34 degrees or thereabouts, cold enough that his breath came out of him in visible plumes even before he swung his feet to the floor. He slept in his thermal base layer and his wool socks, and he kept his boots beside the sleeping pad, and he had his pants on and his laces tied in the 90-second interval between sitting up and crossing to the door. He put his hand on Smoky's shoulder before he turned the knob. Her fur was raised along the ridge of her spine. Not the warning bristle, the attentive bristle. The bristle she wore when she was reading something beyond the door that her handler had not yet been given permission to acknowledge. Jax looked down at her. "What do you have?" he said. Quiet, the way he would have said it in a patrol stack in a country that was now 10,000 miles and 11 years away. Smoky did not answer, because dogs do not answer, but her tail gave one hard thump against the floorboards. Once. It was not a happy thump. It was a confirmation. Jax opened the door. The cold hit him the way it always hit a man in Alaska in October before dawn, in the face, through the mouth, into the lungs, a slap of -5 degrees Fahrenheit that made his sinuses lock for a second. The yard in front of the cabin was gray-blue, lit only by the pre-dawn sky and the faint purple leftover from the aurora that had faded an hour before. The snow on the ground was 4 inches deep and untouched. The spruce line, 40 yards to the east, stood black against the lightening sky. Smoky went past him. She did not run. She moved at the particular trot that meant she was following a scent she had already confirmed. A trot that covered ground economically without disturbing it, and she angled diagonally across the yard toward the spruce line. And her ears were forward, and her tail was level with her back, and she did not look back at him. That was the part Jax noted. In 9 years of working with her, Smoky had never once failed to check over her shoulder for him when she moved out on her own initiative. She had checked when she was 3 months old on the training yard at Lackland. She had checked in a poppy field outside Marja when the wind shifted. She had checked at a VA hospital parking lot in Tacoma when a man dropped a glass bottle. She always checked. It was doctrine, hers as deep as the bone. She did not check now. Whatever she was tracking, she had already decided he was going to follow. Jax closed the cabin door, set his canvas pack on his shoulder, slid his military surplus jacket over his base layer, pulled on his knit watch cap, and went after her. Her tracks were clean in the snow. 4-inch prints, the left rear slightly splayed from an old wound, the spacing that of a working trot. He followed them out of the yard, past the rusted hulk of Elias Yakov's stripped pickup, past the plywood outhouse, and into the spruce. The woods here were old Sitka spruce, the big ones 80 to 100 feet tall, their trunks wrapped in pale bluish moss. The canopy above was dense enough that the snow on the forest floor was patchy, and the ground showed through in places as frozen duff and fallen needles. Smoky's tracks wove through the trunks on a line that ran northwest, toward the shoreline of Cook Inlet, toward the place where the land ended and the water began. Jax moved after her at a pace that did not tire him. The cold was a living thing on his face. He breathed through his nose to keep his teeth from aching. His right hand, tucked into his jacket pocket, held the folding knife he carried everywhere, not because he expected to use it, but because a man who has been trained to carry a knife does not stop carrying one. His left hand was free. His left hand was always free, in any terrain, because his left hand was the hand that found balance and made contact and signaled to the dog. 300 yards in, he stopped. Smoky's tracks had veered left. They had left the main line she was running and angled hard south and Jax followed the deviation for 10 yards before he understood what it meant. She had stopped here. She had crossed a scent. She had moved off her original vector and come back to it. The scent she had crossed belonged to a man. Jax crouched and read the snow. A single set of boot prints, headed the same direction as Smoky's tracks. Size 11. Rubber sole with a hexagonal tread pattern. Recent, not more than 2 hours old. The gait was even, unhurried, the stride of a man who knew where he was going and was not afraid of the place he was going to. Jax stood and continued after Smoky. 400 yards farther, he came out of the spruce and onto the headland above Cook Inlet, and he saw the man. The man was standing on a low bluff 30 yards to Jax's right, facing the water. He was young, 25, 26, maybe 27. He wore a brown canvas Carhartt coat over a gray hoodie, insulated brown Carhartt pants, rubber bunny boots, and a faded Alaska Airlines ball cap pulled low. He was tall, 6 feet and some, lean in the way that men who worked on fishing boats were lean. The leanness of men who had eaten well and moved hard since childhood. He was Denaina. Jax could see it in the cheekbones even at 30 yards, in the way the man carried his shoulders, in the square stillness of how he stood. The man had not heard Jax yet. He was looking down at the beach below the bluff. He was looking at Smoky. Smoky was 30 feet below him on the broken strand, 50 yards down the coastline, and she was standing over something. The man on the bluff was a fisherman named Jonas Kalifornsky, and he was 26 years old, and he had lost his father in a boat accident 11 months ago off Anchor Point in a squall that had come up in the space between 2 weather updates. His father had been 71. His father had been the last man in the family who knew the old names for all the places along this coast, the Denaina names that had been carried through from before the Russians had built their stockade at Kenai in 1791. Jonas had been on the boat with him. Jonas had tried. The Coast Guard had pulled Jonas out of the water 43 minutes after the radio call. They had not pulled his father out. His father was somewhere under Cook Inlet, a piece of the inlet now, and the inlet had been his father's inlet, and Jonas walked the tide line after storms because that was what his father had done every autumn of his life. And Jonas was doing it now because if he did not do it, then no one else would. And then it would be one more thing lost. Jonas turned his head at the sound of Jax's boots on frozen duff. His hand went to his hip, not to a weapon, but to the place a weapon would have been if he had been carrying one, which was instinctive, which was the hand memory of a man who had grown up around guns but was not at that moment armed. He saw Jax. He read Jax in a single glance. The beard, the jacket, the pack, the stance. He did not relax, but he did not tense further. "That your dog?" Jonas said. His voice was flat, not unfriendly. Flat. "Yes," Jax said. "She's been standing there for 20 minutes, Jonas said. "I've been watching her. I didn't know she had anybody." Jonas nodded once, slowly. His eyes went back down to the beach. "Something's in the permafrost down there," Jonas said. "She's on it." Jax moved up beside him and looked down. The bluff dropped 15 feet to a narrow strand of frozen gravel and broken shale. The tide was out. Beyond the strand, Cook Inlet lay gray and flat and breathing, the water moving in the slow, heavy way salt water moves when it is just above freezing. Along the base of the bluff, for about 200 feet, the permafrost was visibly fractured. Great wedge-shaped cracks ran through the frozen earth at intervals of 6 and 8 and 12 feet, and the edges of the cracks were raw, and small clods of dark soil and gravel had fallen away onto the beach below. A block of ground about 20 feet wide and 30 feet long. Jax's soldier brain measured it without his permission, was severed from the bluff by the cracks, and was leaning barely seaward. Smoky stood at the far edge of that block. She was looking down at something at her feet. She did not look up at Jax when he came into her peripheral vision. She did not thump her tail. She stood the way she had stood at interrogation checkpoints in Helmand, perfectly still, completely locked on, waiting for her handler to close the distance and read what she had found. "I'm going down," Jax said. "That ground is rotten," Jonas said. "It's gonna go." Jonas did not move for a moment. Then he pulled a phone from his coat pocket, a battered iPhone with a cracked screen, and he held it up. "I got a signal here," he said. "Barely. You want me up here or down there?" Jax looked at him. Jonas was offering a choice. The choice was between witness and partner. Jax read the man, read his 26-year-old face, read the slight tension along his jaw that said he had already decided which one he wanted to be. "Stay up," Jax said. "If it goes, you call." "Who do I call?" "State troopers. Then the tribal council. Then FBI field office, Anchorage." Jonas's eyes narrowed 1 millimeter. "You think it's that kind of thing?" "My dog thinks it is," Jax said. "She is usually right." Jonas looked at Smoky for a long second. "Go," he said. Jax went over the edge of the bluff on his heels, controlling the slide, and came down on the strand in a crouch. The frozen gravel crunched under his boots. The cold off the water was immediate and specific, a wind coming in off the inlet with teeth in it, and his eyes watered. He moved along the base of the bluff until he reached the fractured block of permafrost. He stepped onto it carefully. The ground gave 1/2 inch and held. He crossed to Smoky. She moved aside when he arrived, 3 steps, exact, and sat. At her feet, where the surface of the permafrost had split along a natural seam, a corner of something gray was showing through the dark earth. It was metal. It was welded. It was the kind of welding a man did when he was building something he did not want to come apart. The corner was roughly 6 inches by 6 inches, and it had a bolt in it, a heavy hex-head bolt painted gray a long time ago. The paint now oxidized white along the edges where moisture had worked at it across the decades. Jax got down on one knee. He brushed the frozen soil away with his gloved hand. The permafrost crumbled easily where it had been fractured, and within 3 minutes he had uncovered a flat plate of welded steel about 18 inches on a side, part of a larger box that continued down into the earth. He scraped at the top edge. He could feel the shape of the container beneath his fingers, through the leather of his glove. It was big. The full outline, as far as he could trace it by touch through the soil, was roughly 5 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 3 feet deep. About the size of an old chest freezer, the size of a coffin, if the coffin had been built for a man with a lot of equipment. Jax sat back on his heels. The sun was coming up now over the Chugach Range to the east, a pale gold light spreading along the horizon of the inlet, and the light fell across the metal plate and made the welds visible in a way they had not been visible a moment before. The welds were clean. They were the work of a man who knew what he was doing. They were old. The steel underneath was 1960s or 1970s marine grade. Jax's father had welded steel like this for pipeline contractors in the 70s, and Jax's hand remembered it from the toolbox, from the smell of a garage in Lewiston. Someone had buried this. Someone had buried this with care, at least 50 years ago, in permafrost that was supposed to hold it until the end of the world. Smoky watched him. Jax stood up. He looked at the block of permafrost under his boots. He looked at the fractures which were widening even as he stood there, a new crack opening with an audible pop 3 feet to his left. He looked at the gray water of Cook Inlet, which was 15 feet below him and was, he now understood, where this entire block of frozen earth was going to slide. Probably today, probably before nightfall, definitely before the week was out. The container and whatever it held would go with it, down into 200 feet of salt water and silt. Jax looked up at the bluff. Jonas was still standing there, phone in hand, watching him. Jax raised one finger and drew a slow circle in the air, then pointed at Jonas's phone. Jonas nodded. He lifted the phone and began to dial. And Jax Harlan, who had walked away from every fight that was not his own for 11 straight years, who had learned that caring cost a man more than he had left to spend, knelt back down in the frozen mud of a coastline that did not belong to him, and he began to dig. It took Jax Harlan 4 hours and 11 minutes to get the container out of the ground, and by the end of it his hands were shaking from the cold inside his gloves in a way that he had not let himself notice while he was working. He went back up the bluff to the cabin first, at a fast walk that cost him 20 minutes, and he came back down with the splitting maul and the pry bar and the iron tire tool from the bed of his truck and with a length of nylon rescue strap he had kept since a training course at Fort Bliss in 2014. Jonas stayed on the bluff the entire time. Jonas did not offer to come down, and Jax did not ask him to. One of them needed to remain where the signal was, and the block under the container gave another audible crack every 8 to 12 minutes, and a second man on the block was a second man to lose. Smoky moved to the edge of the block, away from Jax on her own decision. She sat at the very inland edge where the crack was widest, and she watched both directions at once, up the bluff and down the strand, and she did not move from that position for the entire 4 hours, except once, when a gull dropped out of the sky and landed on the beach 40 feet west of them, and her ears came up, and she tracked the gull until it flew off, and then her ears went back to level. Jax chipped the permafrost out around the container inch by inch. The earth was harder than frozen concrete in the places where the fracture had not reached it, and softer than wet cake where it had. He worked by feel. He did not try to lift the container until he had the full outline of it clear, and by the time he had the outline clear the tide had turned and was coming back in, and the wind off the inlet had picked up 3 knots, and his cheeks had gone the specific numb that came before true frostbite. He rigged the rescue strap around the container and up over a boulder on the upper strand, and he used the maul handle as a lever. And in 3 attempts he broke the container free of the permafrost that had held it for half a century. It came out of the ground with a sound like a door being pulled off a tomb. He dragged it 20 feet inland, off the fractured block onto solid gravel. The sweat under his thermal shirt was freezing against his skin by then. He stopped, he breathed. He did not sit down, because he knew if he sat down he would not stand up for 20 minutes, and he did not have 20 minutes to give. He looked up at the bluff. Jonas was still there. Jax did not open the container on the beach. A soldier's rule. You did not inventory a cache in the open. You moved it. You moved it somewhere you controlled, or somewhere no one else could see, and then you opened it. He climbed the bluff. Smoky came up with him, and she came up in the way she had always come up, inclines with her wounded hind leg. 1 step slower than her natural gait, and she did not complain. Jonas was waiting. "That thing weighs 200 pounds, Jonas said. "About that," Jax said. "Yes." Jonas looked at him for a long second. His face did not show surprise. It showed something more careful than surprise, a reassessment, the look of a man adjusting his internal file on another man. "We need to move it off the beach," Jax said. "Now." Jonas went. Jax stayed on the bluff with Smoky and the container below and the rising tide. He crouched in the snow, and he put his hands inside his jacket, under his armpits, to bring the feeling back. His fingers burned the way fingers burned when they were deciding whether to come back or to die. He waited. Smoky pressed her shoulder against his side. The tide came in 1 inch, 2 inches. Jonas came back in his truck, a dented green 1998 Ford F250 with chains on the rear tires, and they went down a ragged cut in the bluff that Jonas knew and Jax did not, a cut the locals used for salmon hauling, and they got the truck within 40 feet of the container. They winched the container up with the truck's electric winch. It came. The block of permafrost behind them gave a sound like a tree falling, and a piece of it separated, and the piece slid seaward 6 feet and stopped, but the main block held, for now. The container rode in the bed of Jonas's truck, lashed with the rescue strap. They drove inland. Not back to Elias Yakov's cabin. Jax made that decision in the first 30 seconds in the cab. The cabin was unsecured, and everyone in Ninilchik knew he was there. They drove toward the town, and Jonas did not ask where they were going. And when they reached the intersection of Sterling Highway and the gravel road that led to the tribal offices, Jonas turned right without being told. "How did you know?" Jax said. "Where else would you be going?" Jax nodded. The tribal offices of the Ninilchik Traditional Council were in a one-story blue-painted wooden building set back from the highway in a gravel lot between a Russian Orthodox church with a green onion dome and a general store with a sagging porch. It was 11:15 in the morning. The council office was open. The door had a sign that said so. Jonas parked. He did not get out right away. "You want me in there with you?" Jonas said. Jonas nodded. He got out. Jax came with him. Smoky came on a short leash for the first time in 3 weeks, because the tribal office was a building and he did not take a military working dog into a building off-leash, regardless of whose country he was in. The woman behind the front desk was named Dolores Kvasnikov, and she was 59, and she had worked in this office for 28 years. She was the sister-in-law of the current tribal president and the aunt of Jonas's father, which made her a cousin of Jonas by the arithmetic of the village. She looked up when they came in, and she took in Jonas and the stranger and the dog, and she did not stand up. "Jonas," she said. "Dolores, this is Jax Harlan. He's been at the cannery." "I know who he is," Dolores said. She said it neutrally. She said it without cruelty. She said it the way a woman said, "I know the number of salmon that ran the Kisilov this year." "He found something on the beach," Jonas said. Jonas looked at Jax. Jax spoke. He spoke slowly, because his lips were cold and because he had been trained to speak slowly in situations where a civilian official needed to trust him, and because he was still working out what he did and did not want to say in this room. "A metal container," Jax said. "Welded. Buried in the permafrost about 50 years ago. The permafrost is breaking up. In 4 to 6 hours the ground it was in is going to slide into Cook Inlet. I pulled it out. I have it in the back of Jonas's truck in your parking lot." Dolores looked at him. Jax paused. "Because if it is what I think it is, it belongs to you." Dolores did not blink. She said nothing for 4 seconds. Then she reached for the phone on her desk. "Sit down," she said. "Both of you." They sat. Smoky sat between Jax's boots. Dolores made 3 phone calls. The first was to the tribal president, a man named Edgar Demientiev in his 50s, who was at a fisheries meeting in Soldatna and would be back in 2 hours. The second was to a tribal attorney named Lena Crenshaw, who was not Denaina but who had worked for the council for 11 years and who was in Anchorage and could be reached by phone immediately. The third call was to Mary Stariha. Mary Stariha was the oldest living elder of the Ninilchik Denaina. She was 82. She lived 3 houses from the church, alone, since her husband had died in 2019, and she did not carry a cell phone because she had never seen the point of one, so Dolores called the home phone and it rang 11 times and Mary answered. Dolores spoke to Mary in Denaina, not English. She spoke for about 90 seconds. Jax did not understand a single word of it, but he understood the rhythm of it. The fact that Dolores said his full name once, and the fact that Mary on the other end of the line said something that was short and was not a question. Dolores hung up. "Mary says open it here," she said. "Now. Before anyone else arrives. She says she is coming." Jax looked at Jonas. Jonas looked back. "All right," Jax said. They brought the container in through the back door of the council office, which opened onto the gravel lot, and they set it on a heavy pine table in the small meeting room at the back of the building. The meeting room had a wood stove and 4 folding chairs and a wall of photographs, and the photographs were of men and women from the village, generations of them, the oldest photographs in sepia and black and white, the more recent ones in faded color, and every face in every photograph looked at Jax as he worked the pry bar along the seam of the lid. It took him 20 minutes to open the container. The welds at the seams had held, but the bolts along the lid rim had been installed with a gasket of some kind of old petroleum-based sealant, and the sealant had fossilized, and he had to shear each of the 12 bolts with the pry bar and the maul. The last bolt gave with a sound like a rifle shot. He lifted the lid. Inside the container, laid on a bed of shredded newsprint that had gone tan with age, were 3 things. The first was a set of geological survey instruments, a brass theodolite in a wooden case, 2 seismograph drums, a pair of steel-cased clinometers, tools a field geologist had used in the late 1960s or early 1970s. The second was a metal film canister sealed with electrical tape, about the size of a soup can. The canister was labeled in black grease pencil, Cook Inlet West, Denina Tract 7, Core Spalbles, Oak 1971. The third, and by far the largest item by volume, was a bundle of papers wrapped in heavy plastic sheeting that had yellowed but had not failed. The bundle was perhaps 12 inches thick. The plastic was taped with electrical tape at the seams. Jax cut the tape with his folding knife. He peeled the plastic back. The top document was a map, a topographic map of approximately 80,000 acres of Cook Inlet coastline, extending from a point 5 miles north of the present tribal office to a point 12 miles south, including the entire strand where the container had been buried. The map was marked in red grease pencil with a series of dashed lines and numbered grid squares. The red grease pencil was faded but legible. Under the map was a typed report bound in a cracked leather folder. The report was 182 pages long. The front cover carried a stamp, Confidential Property of Kodiak Northern Petroleum Corporation, October 12, 1971. Jax opened the report. The summary page was the first page after the table of contents. The summary page used 16 lines of typed text to state a finding that had, from the handwritten annotations along the margins, been checked and rechecked and signed off by 3 separate field geologists. The finding was that the tract of Cook Inlet coastline covered by the survey contained recoverable hydrocarbon reserves of significant commercial magnitude. The estimate, in 1971 dollars, was $180 million in recoverable oil and natural gas, on a tract that the report specifically identified, with citations to the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act as lying within the Aboriginal title of the Dena'ina community of Ninilchik. The report had never been filed. There was no receipt from the Alaska Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. There was no registration with the Bureau of Land Management. There was no notation of submission to the Alaska Native Regional Corporation. The document carried on its final page a handwritten annotation in blue ballpoint pen in a different hand from the typed report. The annotation read, "Retained for executive review. Harvey Strand, Regional Director. October 29, 1971. Jax set the report down on the table. He was aware, very distantly, of Jonas standing behind him reading over his shoulder. He was aware of Dolores in the doorway of the meeting room with her hand at her mouth. He was aware of Smoky's ears swiveling toward the front door of the office, and he registered the swivel but did not act on it yet. 52 years, he thought. 52 years of royalties. A woman's voice came from the doorway. Dolores had not spoken. This was another voice. Older. Thinner. A voice that had been used, without quarter, for the entirety of a long life. Jax turned his head. Mary Stariha stood in the meeting room doorway. She was small, she was 4 feet 10 inches tall, and she weighed perhaps 95 pounds, and she was 82 years old, and she wore a purple quilted parka over a flowered dress over wool leggings, over beaded moccasins. Her hair was the color of iron and was pulled back in a single braid that lay over her left shoulder. Her face was the face of a woman who had raised 5 children in this village and buried 2 of them, and who had, in the 60-some years since she had been old enough to pay attention, watched every single thing that had happened to her people happen on a coastline that no one else had ever asked her about. Her eyes were on Jax. "How much?" she said again. Jax looked at her. He looked down at the report. He looked at the finding on the summary page. He did the math in his head, roughly, the way a man did rough math when the numbers were too large to feel. 1971 estimate was 180 million, he said. He paused. Produced across 52 years, at recovered prices, somewhere north of 2 billion. I'd have to see the production records. The track's been producing. You're tracked. Without you. Mary Storiha did not move. She stood in the doorway for perhaps 6 seconds, and her face did not change, and her eyes did not leave his. Then Smoky's head came up, her ears locked forward. She rose from between Jax's boots and took 2 silent steps to the window of the meeting room, which faced the gravel parking lot and Sterling Highway beyond it. Outside, a black Ford Expedition with tinted windows rolled slowly past the tribal office. It did not stop. It did not slow more than it was already going. It passed at a walking speed, and then it accelerated, and then it was gone around the bend toward the church. 2 minutes later, it came back the other way. Jonas, standing at Jax's shoulder, said quietly, "That's not a local truck." "No," Jax said. "It is not." Mary Storiha stepped fully into the meeting room and closed the door behind her. "Who knows you found this?" she said. "In this building," Jax said. 5 people. Out there, I don't know. At least 1. Maybe 2. They didn't find it themselves, so they were looking for it, which means they knew it existed, which means someone has been waiting 52 years for the permafrost to tell on them. Mary nodded. Once. She crossed the room with a steady walk that did not match her 82 years. She stopped at the table. She looked down at the map, and at the report, and at the summary page. She did not touch anything. "My husband," she said. She did not finish the sentence. She turned and looked at Jax. "What do you need?" she said. "Time," Jax said, "and a way to get this out of Ninilchik before they come through the door." "How much time?" 4 hours, maybe 6, before the rest of that bluff goes into the inlet, and before whoever just drove past this window twice decides they have waited long enough. Mary Storiha looked at him for a long second. "You are not from here," she said. Jax opened his mouth to answer, and he had no answer, because the answer was not a thing that fit in a sentence. The answer was a man's father's dog tags, and a wife's wedding ring in a grocery store receipt, and 73 days in a psychiatric ward, and a German Shepherd who had bled on the same soil he had bled on, and a coastline that was going to slide into the sea in 4 hours, and the exact specific weight of being invisible in a town that did not yet know him. He did not say any of that. "Because it needs doing," he said. Mary Storiha looked at him. Her eyes, which were the color of dark river water, held his for perhaps 3 seconds. "Dolores," she said, without turning her head. "Call the FBI field office in Anchorage. Lena, too. Tell them the container is open, and the contents are authenticated and the antagonist is moving. Jonas, get your truck. Mr. Harlan, you stay with the documents." She paused. "And you," she said, "you get warm. Your hands are bad." Jax looked down at his hands. They were bad. He had not noticed. Outside, somewhere up Sterling Highway, an engine changed gears. The next 3 hours were the longest 3 hours Jax Harlan had lived since the 3rd deployment, and he lived them the same way he had lived the 3rd deployment, which was in fragments, by task, without any of the fragments connecting to the ones on either side of them. He did not get warm, he tried. Dolores made him a cup of coffee, and he held the cup in both hands, and he could feel the heat on the outside of his palms, but he could not feel it in his fingertips, which had gone from burning to numb to the terrible thoughtless gray quiet that a combat medic recognized as the 10-minute warning before true frostbite locked in. He drank the coffee. He put his hands inside his jacket against his ribs. He sat in the folding chair in the meeting room while the sun climbed above the spruce to the east, and the afternoon began. The FBI was 40 minutes out by air from Anchorage. The weather was not going to cooperate. A front was building off the Aleutians, a low-pressure system that was going to close the flight window sometime in the late afternoon. The nearest state trooper was in Homer, an hour away by road. The tribal attorney, Lena Crenshaw, was on a plane from Anchorage to Homer already. The tribal president, Edgar Demientieff, was driving back from Soldotna at 75 miles an hour on an icy Sterling highway and was making bad time. Jonas had moved his truck around back of the council building, out of sight of the highway. He had taken the tarp out of the bed and spread it on the meeting room floor, and he and Jax had moved the container off the table and onto the tarp, and Jax had begun to repack the documents. He wrapped the report in its original yellowed plastic. He wrapped the map separately. He wrapped the film canister and the survey instruments in a wool blanket Dolores brought from a closet. Each bundle went back into the container, and the lid went back over the container, and Jonas and Jax lifted the container between them and set it in the bed of Jonas's truck and lashed it down with the rescue strap. The truck was hidden from the highway by the building itself. It would hold for an hour. Jax then did a thing he had not done in 14 months. He called the FBI himself. Dolores gave him the number for the Anchorage field office, and he dialed on her desk phone, and he identified himself by his full military service number, which he had memorized at Fort Benning in 2009, and which he had not recited out loud since his discharge. He gave the duty agent a 3-minute compressed statement that included the words Harvey Strand and Kodiak Northern Petroleum Corporation and 1971 and Dena'ina Aboriginal title. The duty agent asked him to hold. He held for 4 minutes. A different voice came on the line. The different voice said her name was Supervisory Special Agent Rebecca Chen, and she was leaving for the airport now, and she would be on the ground in Homer in 90 minutes, and could he hold the ground? "I will try," he said. "How many hostiles?" Agent Chen said. "2, I have confirmed by sight," Jax said. "I expect more." "Assume yes." There was a silence of exactly 1 second on the other end of the line. "Hold the ground, Mr. Harlan," Agent Chen said. "I am coming." She hung up. Jax set the phone down. He looked at Dolores. "Your bluff," he said, "the one with the container site. The block is still going to go. We pulled the evidence, but we did not pull everything. The survey site itself, the hole in the ground, the scraped marks from the pry bar, the tracks of Jonas's truck. There is forensic value in the site for at least 12 hours before the block gives. If the hostiles find the site first, they will walk away and say nothing was ever there. A clean break in the permafrost is plausible deniability. The hole is the only thing that proves they knew what they were looking for." Dolores looked at him for a long second. "You want to go back to the beach?" she said. "I want to photograph it. With witnesses. And I want to be the one who does it. Because if it gets ugly, I'm the only one in this building who was paid to be on a beach with people trying to kill him." "Jonas," Dolores said. "I'll go," Jonas said. "No," Jax said. "Yes," Jonas said. They looked at each other. Jax was 36. Jonas was 26. Jax had fought 3 wars. Jonas had lost a father to a gray ocean. Jax saw in Jonas's face the exact quiet stubbornness of a man who had already run the calculation and found that he would rather come home wrong than stay home and wonder. "You stay in the truck," Jax said. "You're my radio. You do not leave the truck. If I go down, you drive. You do not come for me. You drive. You get to a signal, and you tell Agent Chen where I went down." Jonas did not answer for 3 seconds. "Fine," he said. They went. The drive back to the beach took 17 minutes. The sun was high for an October Alaska sun, which meant it was at about 30 degrees above the horizon and would stay there for another 2 hours before beginning to drop. The light across the inlet was hard and pale and colorless. The wind off the water had come up to 15 knots and was still building. The temperature had dropped to -8 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind chill on the exposed beach would be -30. Jonas parked his truck at the top of the bluff cut where they had brought the container up. He did not cut the engine, he left the heater on high. Smoky sat on the bench seat between him and the passenger door, and she did not want to. Her head tracked Jax out the passenger window as Jax walked down the cut toward the strand. Her ears were forward, her weight was already shifted toward the door, and Jonas, without being told, wrapped his right hand gently through her collar and held her there. "Easy," he said to her. "Easy, girl. Easy." Smoky did not look at Jonas. Jax went down onto the beach. The bluff had given more since morning. The block with the container hole was now tilted noticeably seaward. The cracks had widened. There was a sound coming out of the permafrost, a low, continuous groaning, the sound of a large mass of frozen earth deciding whether to let go now or in 30 minutes. The tide was at half coming in. The gray water was closer to the base of the bluff than it had been at dawn. Jax walked to the container hole. He took out his phone. He photographed the hole from 8 angles. He photographed the pry bar scrapes along the top rim where he had levered. He photographed the impressions in the permafrost where the container had sat. He photographed the tracks of Jonas's truck. He moved deliberately. He did not hurry, because a man who hurried missed angles, and missed angles in a forensic photograph were a defense attorney's Christmas morning. He was halfway through when the aurora came. It should not have come. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. It was full daylight. There was no aurora at 2:30 in the afternoon. Not in October, not at this latitude, not on any sky any physicist would recognize. But it came. A green curtain rolled across the northern sky at an impossible hour. Impossible light, impossible movement. And Jax Harlan saw it. And his brain, which did not care what time the clock said, did what his brain did when it saw a green curtain in the sky. Flare. Mortar flare. Phosphorus. Kandahar. The hillside outside the dirt road, the night the patrol had been caught in the Wadi Ruiz. Sergeant Ruiz, who was 21 years old and from Albuquerque, and whose sister had mailed him cookies that he had shared with the squad 3 days before, and who had taken a round through the femoral artery from a sniper 200 yards out after a flare had hung over their position for 45 seconds. Ruiz had bled out in 90 seconds because the round had cut the artery clean, and there had not been anything anyone could do, anything, and Jax had held pressure on the wound the entire 90 seconds with both hands and had felt the pulse go from full to nothing under his palms, and the flare overhead had been that same pale shifting green that the aurora was, and he had been 19 years old himself, and he had not known what a man's pulse felt like when it went away until that exact moment, and he had never forgotten it. He was not in Kandahar. He was on a gravel beach in Ninilchik, Alaska, on October 17, 2025, at 2:30 in the afternoon. But his body was in the wadi. His hands, which had been shaking from the cold, went still. His hearing went flat. The wind off the inlet stopped being wind and became the low ambient hush that meant he was inside his own head and could not hear anything from outside of it. His peripheral vision closed. He could see the container hole at his feet and nothing beyond 6 feet in any direction. He breathed. In 4, out 6. It did not work. In 4, out 6. He was on the beach. He was on the beach. He was 36 years old. His name was Jax Harlan. He was on a beach in Alaska. There was no flare. The green in the sky was not a flare, it was the aurora. It was a daytime aurora, which was not possible but which was what was there, and the wind was wind, and the sound under his boots was permafrost, not the wadi, not Ruiz, not the sniper. He counted. 1, 2, 3. He dropped to one knee. He set his phone down on the frozen gravel. He put both palms flat on the frozen ground. The ground was real. The ground was cold. The ground was 44.5 billion years old, and it did not care what his brain was doing. And that fact, more than any breathing technique the VA had ever taught him, was the fact that had 3 times in the last 4 years brought him back. The ground. The ground. The ground. He heard Smoky. She was not in the truck. She was behind him. She had come down the bluff cut without Jonas letting her go, which meant Jonas had let her go, which meant Jonas had seen Jax drop to his knee from 50 yards away and had made a decision. She came across the gravel at a dead run, and she hit Jax at the left shoulder, and she drove her body against his flank, and she stayed there. She did not lick his face. She did not whine. She pressed. She leaned her full 43 pounds of working muscle against his ribcage, and she breathed against his throat, and her breathing was slow, 4 in, 6 out, the exact rhythm she had learned off him across 9 years, and she breathed it at him now, and he matched it. 4 in, 6 out. 4 in, 6 out. The wadi thinned. The beach came back. The green in the sky went flat, and then went away. And then it was just a pale winter sky over Cook Inlet again. And the aurora, if it had been an aurora, was gone. Jax put his face against the top of Smoky's skull. "I know," he said. He was talking to her. He was also talking to Sergeant Ruiz. He was also talking to his father, who had never once in 31 years of being his father admitted to having had a single flare in his own night sky, and who had also been there with him in every single one of Jax's. He was talking to the dog that had kept him alive longer than any doctor or any therapist or any woman who had claimed to love him. "I know," he said. Smoky's tail thumped against his thigh. Once, soft. He stood up. He put his phone back in his pocket. He picked up the pry bar. He walked up the bluff cut with Smoky at his hip. He got into the passenger side of Jonas's truck. Jonas looked at him. "You good," Jonas said. Jax did not answer. He reached across the bench seat and put his hand on Smoky's head and let it rest there. Jonas put the truck in gear. For 3 seconds, sitting in the heated cab with the dog's head under his palm and a 26-year-old man watching him carefully and the inlet gray and enormous beyond the windshield, Jax Harlan thought about driving. He thought about telling Jonas, "Take me back to the cabin. I'll be on the road before dark. Whatever happens next is not mine. I pulled the container. I gave the council the documents. I called the FBI. I did more than I was ever asked to. I did more than the system ever did for me. Somebody else can sit here and freeze and wait for Harvey Strand's men to show up. I have done enough for one country that never did anything for me." He thought about it. He thought about it for 3 full seconds. Smoky, under his palm, did not move. She did not move because she was not going to make the decision for him. She had made the decision for him in the pre-dawn at the cabin door, when she had gone past him without checking over her shoulder, and she had made the decision for him on the block of breaking permafrost when she had stood over the corner of the container and waited. And she had made the decision for him 3 minutes ago on the beach, when she had crossed 50 yards in a dead run to put her body against his ribcage. She had made her decisions. This one was his. He took his hand off her head. "Drive us back to the council," he said. "Agent Chen is 90 minutes out. We have to hold the ground." Jonas nodded, once, and put his foot on the gas. The tires crunched in the frozen gravel. Smoky's ears went forward. On the beach behind them, 100 feet inland of the water, a boot print appeared in the snow on top of the bluff, and then another, and then a third, on a part of the headland Jax had not walked, and that Jonas had not walked, and that Smoky, 3 minutes earlier, had not yet smelled. They did not make it to the council. They had gone 1.5 miles up the gravel road toward Sterling Highway when Smoky's entire body locked. Not her ears, not her head. Her entire spine, from the ridge above her shoulders to the base of her tail, went rigid in the space of a single breath, and she sat up on the bench seat between Jonas and Jax, and her head swung toward the driver's side window. Jax saw it. Jonas saw it. Jonas had known the dog for 6 hours. But Jonas had grown up around working dogs on fishing boats and had hunted moose with his father since he was 11. And Jonas understood what it meant when a dog's spine went rigid and her head tracked a single point in the landscape. "Stop," Jax said. Jonas stopped. He braked the truck on the gravel road, and the engine idled, and the three of them sat in the heated cab in silence. "Where?" Jonas said. "Her eyes," Jax said. "Track her eyes." Jonas tracked. Smoky was looking through Jonas's window, across the gravel road, across 40 yards of open pasture that had been a haying field before it froze, into the spruce on the far side. She was not looking at a point on the tree line. She was looking at a point 20 feet inside the tree line, in the shadow of the trunks. Jonas did not see anything. Jax did. A reflection. A single thin line of reflection about 4 feet off the ground. The length of a rifle scope's objective lens, stationary. It could have been ice on a spruce branch. It was not. "Back up," Jax said. "Slow. Keep the truck between us and the tree line." Jonas put the truck in reverse. He did not get the chance to accelerate. The front passenger tire of the truck went flat in the space of 1 second with a sound like a nail gun, and then the rear passenger tire followed, and the truck lurched down on its right side and settled on the bare rims. The shots had been suppressed. Jax had heard them because he had been listening for them. Jonas, who had not been, only registered the truck going down. "Get out the driver's side," Jax said. "Now. Get out and go down the ditch. Do not stand up. Crawl." Jonas's face was white, but his hands moved. Military kids grew up with muzzle discipline, and Jonas's father had been Coast Guard 22 years ago, and the muscle memory was there. He opened the driver's door, rolled out of the cab onto the gravel below the level of the truck's window line, and went into the ditch on his elbows. Jax unclipped Smoky's leash. He did not unclip it because he wanted her off-leash in a firefight. He unclipped it because a leash in a firefight was something an enemy could grab. Then he followed Jonas out the driver's door. Smoky came with him, shoulder to shoulder, and the three of them went into the ditch on the road's left side and lay flat in the snow. The truck was between them and the spruce. For the moment. Jax had his folding knife and a phone. He opened the knife one-handed. "Agent Chen is 40 minutes out," he said. "Can you run?" 200 yards through the pasture. The church has a radio. Father Nick keeps it for storm season. Go. Stay in the ditch until the road curves. Then go through the pasture at an angle, not in a straight line. Do not stand up until you have to." Jonas looked at him. Jonas was 26 years old. Jonas had lost a father to a gray ocean. Jonas, in the next 3 seconds, aged 7 years. Jonas went. He went low and fast down the ditch, and the ditch took him around a slow bend, and then he was out of sight. And Jax and Smoky were alone on a gravel road in Ninilchik, Alaska, with a man with a rifle in the spruce and a man somewhere else Jax had not yet located. Jax took 2 slow breaths. He dialed Agent Chen with his thumb. She picked up in 2 rings. "I am pinned," Jax said. 1 mile west of the tribal council on the beach road. At least 1 rifle in the spruce on the north side of the road. Tires shot out. My civilian is going for the church. 200 yards. I need 40 seconds. Copy. 38 minutes out. He pocketed the phone. He looked at Smoky. "Okay," he said. She looked back at him. He did not give her a command. He was her handler. He was her handler. And she had already read the situation, and she already knew. She had known since the second tire went flat. She had known since the spine lock in the cab. She was looking at him now not for an order, but for permission to execute a plan she had already made. He gave the permission with his left hand. A flat palm, fingers spread, held low against his thigh. The signal in the working dog vocabulary he had built with her across 9 years that meant, read the ground, do what you know, come back to me. Smoky came up out of the ditch and went low across the gravel road on her belly, using the truck as cover, and disappeared around the back of the truck into the ditch on the far side. Jax did not watch her go. He focused on the spruce. The rifle in the spruce was a hunter. Jax could feel it. Not a soldier, a hunter. Hunters on a rifle waited. Hunters on a rifle did not move until they had a shot. The hunter had taken the tires because the hunter had been told to stop the truck and hold the occupants. The hunter had not shot Jonas during Jonas's run down the ditch because the hunter had not had a clean shot through the truck and had not wanted to reveal his position with a second suppressed report that missed, which meant the hunter was disciplined, which meant the hunter was the second man, which meant the first man, the senior man, was somewhere else. Somewhere that gave him the angle the hunter did not. Jax looked up the gravel road. There. 100 yards east, where the road rose slightly over a shoulder of frozen ground, a figure was walking. One man, black insulated parka, gray tactical pants, rubber boots, a scoped bolt-action rifle held at a low ready across his chest. He was walking at an unhurried pace directly down the center of the gravel road toward the truck, because he knew the truck was disabled, and he knew the hunter in the spruce had the angles on anyone who tried to leave the truck. He was the first man. He was going to walk up to the disabled truck, call for whoever was in it to come out with their hands visible, and then shoot them in the gravel road and push them into the ditch and let the inlet weather take care of the rest. He would arrive in approximately 90 seconds. The hunter in the spruce would hold his overwatch until then. Jax had seen this plan on a Tuesday afternoon in Fallujah in 2007, and he had learned that day what happened when a man in a ditch did not have an answer for it. He had an answer today. He had Smoky. He was not going to survive what was coming. He did not need to survive what was coming. He needed to put enough friction between the man in the road and the church for Jonas to reach Father Nick's radio. That was the only variable that mattered. 40 seconds. 38 seconds. 36. He pulled himself up into a low crouch against the side of the ditch. He did not look for Smoky. He trusted her. He waited. 30 seconds. The man on the road closed to 50 yards. The man on the road stopped. The man on the road did not stop because he had seen Jax, because Jax was below the ditch line and invisible. The man on the road stopped because, from somewhere in the pasture on the opposite side of the road from the spruce, a German Shepherd had begun to bark. The bark was not the alert bark of a dog warning its handler. The bark was not the warning bark of a dog holding ground. The bark was something else entirely. It was a pattern. 3 short. 1 long. 2 short. Pause. 3 short. 1 long. 2 short. Jax knew the pattern. Smoky had not used the pattern in 9 years. It was the pattern the handlers in his unit had trained their dogs to mimic from the squad leader's voice commands back in a training yard at Bagram in 2013, a pattern that their dogs had learned to associate with the arrival of a second squad into an operational area. 3 short, 1 long, 2 short. The Morse letter V, Victor reinforcements on site. The bark of a working dog that had been trained for a 6-month operational period that had ended when Smoky had caught a round in the hindquarters and been pulled out of theater, to signal to a dog on the far side of a compound that support had arrived. The man on the road heard the pattern. He did not know the pattern. He did not need to know the pattern. What he knew was what his ears told his central nervous system without his permission, which was that there was a trained working dog, running, in the pasture to his right, which meant there was a handler with that dog, which meant that for the last 90 seconds he had been walking down an open gravel road while a second hostile element had been flanking him to his south, and that the second element had just announced itself. He turned his head. Not his body. His head. 40 yards to the east, in the spruce where the hunter was, there was a rustle. The hunter had also heard the bark. The hunter, less disciplined than the senior man, moved. The branch he was using for a rifle rest shifted. His rifle scope tracked off Jax's truck and toward the pasture. 3 seconds. 3 seconds was what Smoky had bought. Jax went. He went up out of the ditch in a full sprint at a 45-degree angle away from the truck and away from the pasture toward the scrub alder on the north side of the road, which was the last cover between the road and the high ground above the beach. He ran hard. He ran the way a 36-year-old combat veteran with old knees ran when he had not run in 10 months but had run every day for 12 years before that. His legs remembered. His lungs remembered. He crossed 40 yards of open frozen ground in 9.5 seconds, which was not his best time, but which was, given the air temperature, the best time anyone in that valley was going to put down that year. The first man fired. The shot was not suppressed, because the first man had a bolt-action hunting rifle and had not thought he would need suppression on a Sunday afternoon in Ninilchik, Alaska. And the crack of the shot rolled across the pasture and the spruce and the inlet and the village 3/4 of a mile inland. The round went wide. The round went wide because the first man had been tracking Jax's running silhouette with a scope optimized for a stationary animal at 200 yards, not a sprinting man at 70. The first man did not fire again. He did not fire again because, from Ninilchik village behind him, a siren began. It was Father Nick's siren, the church siren that sat on a pole behind the rectory and that had been installed in 1978 for tsunami warnings and which the Ninilchik Traditional Council had maintained for 47 years. It ran off a diesel generator. It had a range of 7 miles of clear country. Father Nick had gotten Jonas's call. The siren did not stop. The first man lowered his rifle for exactly 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds he made a calculation. The calculation was that the FBI had to be 30 or 40 minutes out, which meant he still had time, which meant he could still execute, except that a dog was loose in the pasture, and a church siren was sounding, and a village of 200 people was about to be out of their houses on the gravel road, and his hunter in the spruce was already breaking position. Jax could see the hunter moving through the trees in his peripheral, no longer hidden, no longer in overwatch, withdrawing. The first man made his second calculation. The second calculation was that he did not want to be on this gravel road in 60 seconds. He turned. He walked. He did not run. Men like him did not run, because running was admission, and men like him had spent 52 years admitting nothing. He walked east, back up the road, and around the bend, and was gone. The rifle in the spruce withdrew. A vehicle engine started somewhere north in the timber. A diesel. And a minute and a half later Jax heard it recede up a logging spur that connected to Sterling Highway, 11 miles north of Ninilchik. And then the sound was gone, and there was only the siren, and the wind, and the gray sky, and the pasture. Jax was on one knee at the base of an alder. His breath was coming in clouds so heavy he could not see through them. His right hand was bare. He had taken his glove off at some point in the run, probably at the truck, probably when he had reached for the folding knife, and his right hand was not just numb now, but was white to the second knuckle on every finger, the specific opaque white of second-stage frostbite. He did not notice. He was listening for Smoky. He whistled. Short. Low. The recall whistle. Silence. He whistled again. From the pasture, maybe 200 feet away through the low scrub, a dog came at a trot through knee-deep snow. Smoky. Moving on the old wounded hind leg, a stride slower than her natural gait. Her rib cage was pumping. Her tongue was out. There was no blood on her. She was not hit. She came up the ditch, and up the bank, and up to Jax, and she sat in front of him, and she waited. Jax put his left hand, his still gloved hand, on the top of her skull. He was going to say, "Good girl." He was going to say, "Smoky, I owe you." He was going to say, "You just saved my life and a village's mineral rights and probably a federal case and maybe, in some accounting of things that did not fit on a line, my soul." He said none of it. He said, "Okay." He said it the way he had said it to her across 9 years of work, in 100 buildings and 11 countries and 1 VA hospital parking lot at 2 in the morning. "Okay. I see you. I see what you did. The mission continues." Her tail thumped against the snow. Once. The siren was still going. Down the road, from the village, headlights appeared. 2 sets, then 3, then 5, pickup trucks. Ninilchik pickup trucks, coming east, coming toward him, coming. Jax understood in a way he had not understood anything in a long time, not as a mob and not as a rescue party, but as something for which he did not have a clean word yet. The first truck pulled up beside him. An older man in a hunting jacket rolled down the window. "You, Harlan," the man said. "Yes." "Jonas said you were out here? Get in." Jax got in, Smoky got in across his lap, the old man drove, and the other trucks fell in behind, and they drove back toward the village, and Jax Harlan sat in the passenger seat of a pickup truck that belonged to a Denaina man whose name he did not yet know, with his right hand going white and his dog in his lap and a siren fading behind him, and he started, very quietly, very slowly, almost invisibly, to shake. He shook for 8 minutes. The old man driving did not look at him. The old man driving did not look at him, because the old man driving had known men who came back from places where men were shot at, and he had known them his whole life, and he knew what a man needed in the 8 minutes after the shooting stopped, which was not to be looked at. He drove. The heater in the old Ford was on high. Smoky's fur thawed against Jax's thighs. Her breathing slowed. His right hand, tucked against his ribs inside his jacket, began, in a distant way, in a way he could almost not feel, to hurt. Hurt was better than white. They pulled up at the Ninilchik clinic. The clinic was not a hospital, it was a cinder-block building with 4 rooms and 1 full-time nurse and a physician's assistant who drove in from Homer 3 days a week, and the physician's assistant happened by the accident of a Sunday schedule to be there. His name was Brady Ostrowski. He was 41. He had done a rotation on a frostbite ward in Fairbanks during his PA program in 2016. He knew what he was looking at when Jax was walked in. Jax's right hand was photographed graded and submerged in a basin of water at a controlled 104 degrees Fahrenheit inside of 11 minutes from arrival. He lost the top joint of his index finger to the rewarming process, which Brady explained was not a failure of the rewarming, but a consequence of how long the hand had been at temperature before arrival. The tissue in that joint had not survived the freeze, the tissue in the other fingers had. It was, Brady told him quietly, a better outcome than they had any right to expect. Jax nodded, which was the only response he had. He was moved to the back room for observation. An IV went into his left arm. A heated blanket went around his torso. His core temperature, which had been registering at 93.6 Fahrenheit on arrival, began its slow climb back toward normal. Smoky was allowed in the room. She lay on the linoleum floor at the foot of the bed, with her head between her paws and her amber eyes half-lidded, and she did not move. The clinic filled up. Agent Rebecca Chen arrived at 3:48 in the afternoon by tribal truck from Homer, because the Homer airport had socked in 30 minutes before her plane was supposed to take off for Anchorage, and the Homer state troopers had driven her the remaining 40 minutes to Ninilchik. She was 46. She was 5'3". She wore a navy blue FBI windbreaker over a gray fleece and civilian jeans and mid-calf sorrel boots, and her hair was in a short practical cut, and her face showed the particular exhaustion of a federal agent who had been on a case for 15 months that the Department of Justice had not yet approved for full task force status. She came into Jax's room with 2 junior agents and a tribal police officer and Lena Crenshaw, the tribal attorney who had landed at Homer 2 hours before her and had been the one calling the state troopers for the last 90 minutes of the fight. They had the container, they had the documents, they had photographs of the crime scene at the bluff taken by Edgar Demientieff in the hour after Jonas reached the church from an angle above the site on a spruce trunk, and those photographs had been taken in time because the block of permafrost holding the original hole gave at 4:08 in the afternoon and slid in a single slow calving motion into Cook Inlet, taking 60 tons of frozen soil and 2,000 square feet of shoreline with it. Edgar had filmed the calving too. Jax took Agent Chen's statement from a hospital bed. He could not hold a pen. The physical fact of it hit him for the first time when Agent Chen set a blue ballpoint bic on the Formica table beside the bed and slid a yellow legal pad toward him and said, in the standard calm of a federal agent who had written out statements with 1,000 witnesses, "Whenever you're ready, Mr. Harlan." Jax looked at the pen. He looked at his right hand, which was wrapped in gauze and a blue neoprene sleeve, and which rested, palm up, on the heated blanket. The top joint of his index finger was gone. His thumb was bandaged. His middle and ring fingers were heavily dressed. Only the last 2 fingers of his left hand had any grip strength, and even those he could not fully close. He could not sign his own name. He had written his name on every official form the United States Army had ever handed him, for 12 years, 200 and some forms by his last count, and he had written it as neatly and as precisely as his 7th-grade teacher in Lewiston, Idaho, had drilled him to write it in 1996, and his name in his handwriting was the single thing in his life that he had kept unchanged through every deployment and every discharge and every psychiatric evaluation and every divorce. And now, in a clinic in Alaska, with a federal agent holding a blue pen and a yellow pad 6 inches from his right hand, he could not do it. A thing broke inside him that was not his hand. Agent Chen saw his face. She did not comment on it. "I'll write," she said. "You talk. We'll have it typed up for signature tomorrow if your hand allows. If not, I can take a voice affidavit. Both are admissible. You tell me which you prefer." Jax cleared his throat. He tried again. "Right," he said. She wrote. He told her what had happened. He told her slowly, because his voice was hoarse, because his core temperature was still at 95, and he was shivering in intermittent bursts that he could not fully control, because he was a man who gave testimony the way he had been trained to give testimony, in numbered bullet points, without embellishment, without opinion, each fact independently verifiable. He told her about the cabin. He told her about the dawn. He told her about Smoky. He told her about Jonas. He told her about Dolores and Mary and the documents. He told her about the aurora on the beach at 2:30 in the afternoon, and what it had done to him, which he had not told a federal officer before in his life, and which he told her now because she had asked for the complete narrative, and because he had understood, across 11 years of giving bad statements, that a statement was only as good as the things you did not leave out. Agent Chen did not react to the aurora part of the statement. She wrote it down. She underlined the time of day twice. It took 2 hours. When she was done, she read the statement back to him in full, and he confirmed, and she set the legal pad aside on the Formica table, and she said, "There's something else we need you to see." Jax nodded. She stepped out to the hallway and came back in with a junior agent who was carrying a sealed plastic evidence bag. Inside the bag was a single envelope. The envelope was yellowed. The envelope had been folded in quarters many years ago and had taken the fold permanently into its fiber. The envelope was addressed, in blue ballpoint pen, in a careful masculine hand, to To whoever, in Alaska, finds this after I am dead. Agent Chen put on blue nitrile gloves. She extracted the envelope from the bag. She opened it with a pair of small scissors along the top fold, because the original seal had fossilized. "We found this taped to the inside of the container lid," she said. "Under the gasket, it wasn't visible when you first opened it. Mary Stariha noticed the anomaly in the seal when she was inventorying the container at the council. We're opening it now in front of you because you're the witness who opened the container. Also because the contents are going to matter to you personally, and you deserve to hear them before a federal office in Washington decides what to do with them." She unfolded the letter. The letter was written on 2 pages of legal-sized lined paper, front and back, in the same careful hand as the envelope, in blue ballpoint pen. The paper had yellowed to the color of dark honey. The ink had not faded. Agent Chen read, "My name is Paul Wickersham. I am a geologist. I was born in Anchorage in 1933. As of today, March 14, 1989, I am 56 years old and I have been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4, inoperable. I'm writing this letter in my kitchen in Palmer, Alaska. I expect to live approximately another 6 months, and I am going to use one of them to drive to the Kenai Peninsula and bury this container, along with the documents and instruments that I have been keeping in my garage since 1971. In 1971, I was employed as a field geologist by Kodiak Northern Petroleum Corporation. In October of that year, I led a survey team that documented hydrocarbon reserves on 80,000 acres of Cook Inlet coastline between Anchor Point and Ninilchik. The land was, at the time, under the jurisdiction of the Aboriginal title of the Ninilchik Dena'ina community, pursuant to the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, which had been signed into law the previous December. On October 29, 1971, my regional director, Mr. Harvey Strand, ordered the complete destruction of the survey. He ordered the destruction of the report, the maps, the instruments, and the core samples. He ordered the destruction of my field notes. His stated reason was that the survey could be redone under a different corporate structure that would not require the royalty obligations of the Native Claims Settlement. He told me that if I refused, I would be terminated with prejudice, and that I would not work as a geologist in the state of Alaska again. He told me that if I went to the regulators, he would arrange for me to be charged with theft of proprietary corporate documents. I was 38 years old. My wife was pregnant with our second daughter. We had a mortgage on a house in Palmer. I had been a geologist for 14 years, and I did not know how to do anything else. I did what he told me to do. I destroyed everything on the record. I burned the report in the furnace at our Anchorage office. I smashed the core samples. I submitted a signed statement to the regional file that the survey had returned inconclusive results and that no further exploration was recommended on the tract. I kept copies. I am not writing this to ask forgiveness. I am not writing this to explain that I was a good man in a bad position, because I was not a good man. A good man would have picked up the phone and called the Department of the Interior. A good man would have walked into the offices of the Ninilchik Traditional Council and put the report on the desk and let the rest of his life happen however it happened. I did not do that. I did not have the courage to do that. I had a wife and a mortgage and 2 small daughters, and I believed, correctly, that Harvey Strand would have ended my career. But I also did not have the stomach to let the lie stand forever. I made copies. I kept them in a welded container in my garage for 17 years this month because I am dying. I am driving to Ninilchik with the container. I'm going to bury it in permafrost on a tract of coastline that was, in 1971, surveyed by my own hand as belonging to the Dena'ina. I'm going to bury it at a depth and a location that will not be disturbed in my lifetime. I have chosen to trust the permafrost because I could not trust myself. Someday, someone will find this, probably after I am dead, probably after Harvey Strand is dead, probably after the company that employed us both has gone through its 3rd corporate merger and its records have been shredded and its officers have retired to Palm Desert. Someday, someone will find this and the survey will be opened, and the Dena'ina of Ninilchik will finally be paid what they should have been paid in 1971. I will not be alive to see it. I am not asking to be. I'm only asking that whoever finds this understands the following, and writes it down, and puts it in the record where I did not have the courage to put it. The crime was committed on October 29, 1971, by Harvey Strand, acting as Regional Director of Kodiak Northern Petroleum Corporation. The crime was enabled by the silence of one Paul Wickersham, geologist, staff employee. I was not the architect. I was the man with the shovel. The architect does not build the building without the man with the shovel. Whoever you are, you're reading this because I was not brave enough to say it while I lived. Be braver than I was. Agent Chen finished reading. She set the letter down on the formica table beside the bed. For a long minute, nobody in the room said anything. Jax Harlan lay in the bed with his bandaged right hand on the heated blanket and his left hand at rest beside it, and he looked at the yellowed paper. He did not look at Agent Chen, and he did not look at Lena Crenshaw, and he did not look at the two junior agents, and he did not look at the tribal police officer. He looked at the paper. He thought about Paul Wickersham. He thought about a 38-year-old geologist in 1971 in an Anchorage office in front of a regional director who had told him he would never work again, who had a pregnant wife and a mortgage and 2 daughters and 14 years of career and a specific kind of courage that he did not have. He thought about a 56-year-old geologist in 1989 dying of pancreatic cancer, driving alone from Palmer to the Kenai Peninsula in a pickup with a welded container in the bed, choosing a piece of permafrost on the exact track that had been surveyed 18 years before, digging a hole by himself, because the permafrost might outlast the men who had told him to be silent. He thought about something he had not thought about in a long time, which was the nurse at the VA hospital in Boise in 2014, who had looked away when he had taken his father's dog tags off his father's neck in the hospital room. Because the nurse had been a woman with her own pregnant daughter and her own mortgage and her own need to keep a job at a federal medical facility, and who could have called security and had not, and who had, by looking away, let a son take his father's dog tags home. Most of the world was Paul Wickersham. Most of the world was the nurse. Most of the world was not Harvey Strand. And most of the world was not the man who put the pry bar in the ground and levered the truth out of the permafrost. Most of the world was the man in the middle, the man who saw, the man who knew, the man who was not brave enough to speak while he lived, but who at the last possible moment left something behind for the brave. Jax had spent 11 years being angry at that man. He was not angry now. He did not have the strength to be angry. He did not have the right hand to be angry with. Something else was happening inside him, something that did not have a word yet. He looked at Agent Chen. Did Wickersham's wife, he said, and stopped. He tried again. Did his family? Do they know? Agent Chen glanced at Lena Crenshaw. His wife passed away in 2008, Lena said. His older daughter lives in Seattle. The younger one lives in Denver. Neither of them knew about the container. We'll be contacting them. Yes, Lena said. They will. Jax nodded. The door to the room opened. Mary Stariha came in. She was alone. She walked with a cane, which she had not been using that morning at the council office, and she carried a paper grocery bag in her free hand. She crossed the linoleum to the bed, and she did not look at Agent Chen or Lena Crenshaw or the junior agents or the tribal police officer, and none of them spoke, and none of them moved. Agent Chen, without a word, gathered her junior agents and Lena and the officer and walked out of the room and closed the door behind them. Mary Stariha sat down in the chair beside the bed. She set the paper bag on her lap. For a long time, she did not speak. Jax did not speak either. The clinic was quiet. The radiator ticked. Smoky, from the floor at the foot of the bed, lifted her head once to look at Mary, and then settled again. Mary Stariha reached with her left hand, and she placed her hand, gently, over Jax Harlan's right hand, over the bandage, over the neoprene sleeve, over the ruined top joint of his index finger. Her hand was small. Her skin was dark and thin and marked with decades. She left her hand there. "Person at the right time," she said. Her voice was quiet. Jax did not answer. He could not answer. Something behind his sternum, a thing that had been held closed by tension and by discipline, and by the specific muscular hardness of a man who had decided 11 years before that he was not going to cry again until he was dead, gave, not broke, gave, the way permafrost gave when the temperature finally reached the exact threshold, not dramatically, just the slow release of something that had been held in tension for too long. He did not make a sound. The tears came down the side of his face into the pillow, and his left hand, which was not bandaged, came up and found Mary Staria's hand where it rested on his right hand, and he closed his left hand around her fingers, carefully, because his grip was bad, and he held on. She let him hold on. At the foot of the bed, Smoky's tail thumped once, softly, against the linoleum. Outside the window of the clinic, the afternoon light had gone to the particular gold of a late Alaska October sun at 4:30, and the spruce across the parking lot were black against it, and the sky above the spruce was beginning, very faintly, to show the first smudge of the evening's aurora. Jax saw it. It was a curtain of green light. His brain did not break this time. His brain saw a curtain of green light. Jax Harlan was discharged from the Ninilchik clinic 4 days later, on a Thursday morning, with the top joint of his right index finger gone and a prescription for antibiotics and a referral to an occupational therapist in Homer he would probably never see. Brady Ostrowski walked him to the front doors of the clinic. Smoky walked on his left. The morning was cold and clear. The sky over Cook Inlet was a hard winter blue. Mary Staria was standing at the curb. She was not alone. Jonas was there, and Edgar Demientieff, and Dolores, and 6 or 7 others from the village whose names Jax did not yet know, but whose faces he was beginning to. None of them spoke. None of them needed to. Mary held out a pair of gloves. They were deerskin. They were handmade. The stitching was sinew. The cuffs were lined with beaver fur. Denaina work, the kind of work a woman learned from her grandmother and taught to her granddaughters, and the gloves were warm the way only handmade deerskin was warm, from the inside out. Jax put out his hands. His left was whole. His right was a ruin. She slid the left glove on first, then the right. The right slid on gently, because she knew. She did not speak. He did not either. He walked to his truck with his hands in deerskin he had not earned and had been given anyway. Smoky jumped in beside him. The engine turned on the second crank. He drove south on Sterling Highway,